I got banned from Christmas for standing up to my stepmother. She demanded an apology, but I did this instead. My name is Derek, and I'm a 21-year-old college student living in Minneapolis. This semester had been particularly challenging, but I was managing to keep everything together. A few nights ago, I visited my dad's house in St. Paul for dinner. It wasn't something I was excited about. Family dinners at Dad and June's were rarely relaxing, but I convinced myself it was worth the effort to maintain some semblance of a connection. Dad had married June 4 years ago, and while I no longer lived with them, I tried to be cordial during the occasional visit. When I arrived, the house looked pristine as always. June had a knack for perfection, ensuring that everything appeared flawless, from the polished floors to the carefully arranged decor. The dining table was set with her finest plates and glasses, the kind she only used for special occasions, even though this was just a regular dinner. The atmosphere felt stiff, as if every detail had been curated to project an image rather than provide comfort. Dinner began with the usual pleasantries. I shared updates about college, my finals, the workload, and the constant juggling of responsibilities. It felt good to vent for a moment, even if I knew the audience wasn't particularly sympathetic. Then, in an instant, the mood shifted. A comment was made, one that dismissed my struggles in a way that felt mocking. The words lingered in the air, their tone sharp and cutting, leaving me stunned. I tried to stay composed, but the weight of the remark gnawed at me. The dismissiveness, the lack of empathy, it was as if my feelings didn't matter at all. The conversation shifted, but the underlying tension remained. Subtle barbs followed, comments that felt like veiled critiques rather than neutral observations. It was clear that the evening wasn't going to end without some kind of conflict. The atmosphere grew heavier as more pointed remarks were made, each one eroding my patience. The entire situation felt like a setup, as though I was being goaded into reacting, only to be blamed for ruining the evening if I did. I finally decided I couldn't take it any longer. I excused myself from the table, the formality of the gesture doing little to mask my frustration. The cold November air hit my face as I stepped outside, and for a brief moment, it felt liberating to escape the stifling environment inside. On the drive back to my apartment, my mind raced through everything that had happened. I replayed the conversations, searching for a way I could have handled it differently. The conclusion was always the same. I hadn't done anything wrong. The dismissal of my feelings, the constant undercutting, and the complete lack of respect were not things I could overlook. When I got home, I reached out to my older sister, Grace, hoping for some understanding or support. Instead, I was met with the suggestion to apologize and let it go to avoid further drama. The response stung more than I expected. It felt like yet another dismissal, another reminder that my feelings were secondary to keeping the peace. Exhausted and frustrated, I put my phone down, staring at the ceiling as the weight of the evening pressed down on me. The next morning, the situation escalated further. A phone call from June, laced with accusations and demands, left me reeling. The insistence that I was at fault, that I owed apologies for simply standing up for myself, was almost laughable. When the conversation ended, it was followed by a long, scathing text from Dad, echoing the same sentiments. By the afternoon, things had spiraled completely out of control. Messages kept coming, each one more dismissive and accusatory than the last, solidifying the narrative that I was the villain in this story. By the end of the day, I learned that my refusal to apologize wasn't just causing temporary tension, it had led to my exclusion from Christmas entirely. The message was clear. Until I was ready to fall in line and accept their version of events, I was no longer welcome. It was a decision that left me both angry and heartbroken, but it also solidified my resolve. This wasn't about a simple misunderstanding or a petty argument. It was about respect, something I was no longer willing to compromise on. The fallout escalated quickly, taking on a life of its own. The morning after our last conversation, June's accusations arrived in a long, dramatic text. She declared that I had disrespected my father, ruined the family dynamic, and behaved like a child. She made it crystal clear that I wouldn't be welcome in their home until I apologized. As if to twist the knife, she singled out Christmas, stating that I wouldn't be included in the family gathering unless I made things right. The words stung more than I expected. Christmas, a time that had always been about family, was now being weaponized against me. Hoping for some support, I called my sister Grace and explained the situation. She listened patiently, but didn't offer the reassurance I was looking for. Her pragmatic suggestion was to apologize, even if I didn't mean it, just to keep the peace. The response felt like a betrayal, as if she were siding with them, even though she knew how unfair it was. The conversation left me feeling more isolated than before. The situation spiraled further the next morning when I woke to find myself added to a group text. June had included Grace and several cousins in a message that read like a public declaration of my banishment. She claimed the family had decided to celebrate Christmas without unnecessary drama, a clear euphemism for excluding me. The responses came quickly. One cousin openly supported June, agreeing that I should have just apologized. Another stayed silent, their lack of response speaking volumes. I didn't reply. I knew any response I made in the heat of the moment would only make things worse. Later that day, my aunt called, and I briefly thought she might be reaching out to support me. But the moment I answered, it was clear she wasn't on my side. She accused me of tearing the family apart and insisted that I apologize for the sake of unity. The conversation quickly turned into an argument, and before I could even fully explain my side, she hung up. The pattern was becoming clear. No matter what I said, I was the one being blamed. By evening, another text from Dad arrived, short and cryptic. His message simply said, "You'll regret this." The words lingered in my mind, feeling more like a veiled threat than anything else. The weight of the situation was overwhelming. It wasn't just about the initial argument anymore. It was about control, manipulation, and their refusal to see me as an adult with valid feelings. I made the decision to block both Dad and June on social media, unwilling to subject myself to any more passive-aggressive posts or underhanded comments. A few days later, one of my cousins reached out privately to let me know what was happening behind the scenes. June had been busy organizing a large family Christmas celebration, specifically branding it as a drama-free holiday. The very idea stung. It wasn't the holiday itself I was mourning. It was the ease with which I was cast aside, treated as if I didn't matter. Despite my cousin's kind attempt to keep me informed, the news left me feeling both angry and deeply hurt. In the midst of all this, a close friend stepped in. Hearing about the situation, they invited me to spend Christmas with their family. I accepted immediately, grateful to have somewhere to go. Still, even as I tried to move forward, the sting of being excluded from my own family lingered. It wasn't just the exclusion, it was the way the narrative was being twisted against me. As the days passed, things went from bad to worse. June, always the queen of curated appearances, started posting on social media as if nothing was wrong. One photo, in particular, caught my attention. Her and Dad standing by their perfectly decorated Christmas tree, smiling like a picture-perfect family. The caption read, "Looking forward to a drama-free holiday with family that knows how to come together." It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't meant to be. The post stayed with me all day, a reminder of how I was being painted as the villain. The next day, a cousin sent me screenshots from a family group chat I wasn't part of. June had been spreading exaggerated and outright false stories about what happened during dinner. She claimed I had stormed out in a rage, yelling at Dad and creating chaos. Her portrayal of events was unrecognizable, and the realization that she was systematically turning family members against me filled me with anger and disbelief. Even more frustrating was another ominous message from Dad, echoing his previous threat, "You'll regret cutting us off." The words were chilling, and I decided not to respond. Instead, I doubled down, blocking both him and June completely. I needed to protect myself from their manipulation and the constant barrage of guilt and accusations. Despite the support from a few understanding cousins and my friend's generous invitation, the whole situation felt surreal. It was no longer just about a misunderstanding or a clash of personalities. It was a full-blown campaign against me, orchestrated by two people who seemed determined to control the narrative. As Christmas approached, The bitterness of being excluded began to mix with a quiet determination. This wasn't just about standing up for myself anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity in the face of relentless attempts to tear me down. Blocking them on social media didn't stop the storm. Over the next few days, family members began reaching out, some with words of support, but most with thinly veiled criticism. The calls and messages came in waves, each one chipping away at my patience. One of my aunts was among the first, launching straight into her reprimand about how I had disrespected my father at dinner. When I calmly explained that I hadn't disrespected anyone and had simply chosen not to laugh at an unkind joke, her response was dismissive, accusing me of being overly sensitive. The call ended abruptly, leaving me more isolated than before. A few days later, I received a message from a neighbor back home. They mentioned overhearing a heated argument between my dad and June, describing how Dad seemed to be under immense pressure. According to the neighbor, he wanted to reconcile with me, but June was adamant that I didn't deserve an apology. The message only confirmed what I already suspected. June was the driving force behind this escalating drama. Not long after, an email from Dad landed in my inbox. It was long and filled with emotional appeals, expressing how much he missed me and how he wanted to repair our relationship. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of guilt. I didn't want to lose my connection with my dad. But as I continued reading, the guilt turned to frustration. Hidden among his pleas was the same refrain: if I just apologized, everything could be resolved. It was clear he wanted to smooth things over without taking any responsibility for his actions. I replied with a short, pointed response, stating that I wasn't interested in moving past this unless he was willing to take accountability. His reply came quickly, accusing me of being influenced by others and claiming I wasn't the person he had raised. The words stung, but I tried not to dwell on them. In the days that followed, I poured my energy into school and work, but the situation refused to leave my mind. Friends became my sounding board, offering unwavering support. One of them suggested I write a letter to my dad, not necessarily to send it, but as a way to process my thoughts. That evening, I sat down and let everything out: the frustration from dinner, the pain of being dismissed, and the hurt caused by their actions since. Reading it over, I felt a sense of catharsis, but I couldn't bring myself to send it. Instead, I tucked it away as a personal reminder of why I was standing my ground. Then came the breaking point. Another cousin reached out to inform me that June had been talking to relatives about banning me from all family events permanently. She had even floated the idea of pursuing legal action to keep me away. The suggestion was absurd, almost laughable, but it also underscored just how far she was willing to go to maintain control. That night, a voicemail from Dad landed on my phone. His voice was strained, almost pleading, accusing me of pushing the family to the brink. I deleted it without responding, unwilling to engage in the cycle of guilt and manipulation. The next day, a close friend invited me to spend Christmas with their family, urging me to avoid the unnecessary stress. Grateful for the offer, I accepted. It felt like the right decision, to step away from the chaos and prioritize my well-being. But even as I made plans to move forward, the tension continued to build. June, relentless as ever, was determined to keep the drama alive. Christmas was still weeks away, yet every day brought new layers of chaos. The next blow came in the form of a family meeting. A cousin gave me a heads up that June had organized it specifically to discuss how to handle the Derek situation. Knowing I wasn't invited, my cousin relayed that the meeting's purpose was to make my banishment from Christmas official. The idea of being discussed like a problem to be solved, without any chance to defend myself, was both infuriating and deeply hurtful. Later that week, my phone buzzed again with an email from June. It was clear she wasn't ready to let things go, and a sinking feeling told me this wasn't the end of her attempts to twist the narrative and control the family's perception of me. The email wasn't the usual passive-aggressive note I'd come to expect. This one looked formal, almost like something you'd receive from an HR department. In it, June accused me of emotionally abusing my dad and listed every interaction we'd had over the past year, twisting each one to make it seem like I'd been intentionally cruel. It was so bizarre, I had to read it twice to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. The email ended with a thinly veiled threat. If my behavior continued, they would be forced to take further action to protect themselves. I didn't respond. At this point, engaging with June was like pouring gasoline on a fire. But ignoring her didn't stop the storm. A few days later, Grace called me, her tone cautious as though she was walking on eggshells. She told me June was talking about taking legal action to ban me from family events permanently. The idea was absurd, almost laughable. Legal action for not laughing at a joke? It was clear that June was determined to escalate the situation into something much bigger. Grace tried to sound sympathetic, but her words fell flat. She claimed she wasn't taking sides, but her neutrality felt like a betrayal. The conversation ended abruptly, frustration hanging in the air like a thick cloud. Not long after, a package arrived at my apartment. The return address was my dad's house, and I hesitated before opening it, unsure of what to expect. Inside was a collection of my childhood belongings, old trophies, photos, and random knickknacks I hadn't seen in years. On top of it all was a folded piece of paper with a handwritten note from Dad. It was short and cutting. "You clearly don't value family, so here's your stuff. We don't need it cluttering our home." I stared at the note, a whirlwind of anger and heartbreak swirling inside me. This wasn't just about clearing space. It was a deliberate, calculated message meant to hurt. I shoved the box into the back of my closet, unwilling to deal with it. Ignoring it felt like the only way to preserve the fragile thread of sanity I had left. The breaking point came a few days later when a cousin forwarded me screenshots of group chats where June had been spreading even more lies. This time, she was accusing me of being unstable and claiming I'd been a troublemaker since childhood. It was a full-blown character assassination, and the malice behind it was staggering. My cousin's message was sympathetic, but it did little to soften the blow. June's campaign against me seemed relentless. Then came the final blow, a letter from a lawyer. The envelope, with its official letterhead, filled me with dread. I opened it cautiously, expecting the worst. Inside was a defamation claim accusing me of spreading lies about June and Dad, damaging their reputations, and causing emotional distress. The accusations were baseless. I hadn't shared anything outside my immediate circle of friends, but the intent was clear. They wanted to intimidate me into silence. I brought the letter to a legal advisor, who quickly dismissed it as a scare tactic. They assured me there was no real case, but the fact that June had stooped to this level left me shaken. It was a new low, even for her. A few days later, one of my friends did something unexpected. Without telling me, they wrote a post online detailing the situation. The story, though anonymous, described the family drama and manipulation I'd been enduring. The post went viral, garnering thousands of shares and overwhelmingly supportive comments. When my friend told me about it, I wasn't sure how to feel. On one hand, it was validating to see so many people take my side. On the other hand, I knew it would only escalate things if my family found out. And, of course, they did. Grace messaged me the next day, furious. She accused me of airing the family's dirty laundry and making everyone look bad. I explained that I hadn't written the post and that no names were mentioned, but it didn't matter. Grace was too angry to listen. The fallout from the post only added to the chaos. The next email from Dad was more of the same, a blend of guilt-tripping and dramatic accusations. He claimed I was tearing the family apart and insisted nothing could move forward until I took responsibility. By this point, I'd had enough. I drafted a simple cease and desist letter regarding the baseless legal threats and had it sent to them. It wasn't elaborate, but it made it clear I wouldn't tolerate their intimidation tactics any longer. A few days later, June sent me a scathing reply. She accused me of ruining Dad's health and causing him unbearable stress, all while painting herself as the victim. It was classic deflection, shifting the blame for the consequences of her own actions onto me. Her words were cruel and unrelenting, but they also revealed something deeper. June wasn't just trying to win. She was trying to erase any sense of accountability for the chaos she had caused. After blocking Dad and June on every platform, I thought I might finally get some peace. But it wasn't long before extended family members I hadn't spoken to in months began reaching out. Some offered their support, expressing disbelief at June's behavior, while others seemed more interested in gossip than the truth. It became clear that cutting off contact with Dad and June wasn't going to be enough to stop the ripple effects. I told mutual relatives I didn't want updates about them and focused on finishing my semester. For a brief period, things quieted down, and I found solace in the temporary silence. That calm didn't last. It started with a call from an old family friend, Linda, whose voice was both surprising and unsettling after so many years. She told me she had heard the things Dad and June had been saying about me, claims that I was manipulative, ungrateful, and tearing the family apart. While her words validated my suspicions about June's campaign to discredit me, they also reminded me of the depths to which she would go to destroy my reputation. Shortly after, I reconnected with Eric, a distant relative on Dad's side. While we'd never been close, he reached out after hearing about the drama. Eric confided that June had been isolating Dad from much of his family for years, controlling his interactions and painting herself as the victim whenever conflicts arose. He offered to help, and within days, he forwarded me screenshots from a group chat. The messages were more of June's lies, fabricated stories about me having outbursts at family events, each one more absurd than the last. Her relentlessness was exhausting, and yet, it was a strange comfort to know someone else saw through her facade. Around the same time, Dad sent another email. This one seemed like an attempt at reconciliation. He expressed regret for how things had escalated and said he wanted to move forward. But buried within the message was the same hollow refrain, I should apologize to put everything behind us. It was clear he still wasn't ready to take accountability for his role in the chaos. I didn't respond. The tipping point came when Eric called late one evening. His voice was low, almost cautious, as he told me he'd overheard June pressuring Dad to remove me from his will. While the news didn't surprise me, it fit her pattern of control. It still left me shaken. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle, the idea that she was actively working to erase me from my own family. Not long after, Grace reached out again. This time, her tone was conflicted, almost apologetic. She admitted that Dad and June had been pressuring her to take their side and that she was struggling to stand up to them. While her admission frustrated me, I also felt a flicker of sympathy. Their tactics had clearly worn her down. I urged her to consider what she was supporting, emphasizing that she didn't have to fight them, but she didn't have to help them either. It was a small step, but it felt like progress. Over the next few weeks, cracks began to form in June's influence. Some extended family members started reaching out to me, apologizing for believing her lies. One cousin admitted they could see now how toxic she was, and while it was a small victory, it felt like a turning point. Even Dad seemed to be wavering. According to Eric, he and June had been fighting more often, with June blaming him for losing control of the family. Eventually, Dad sent another email. This time, it was different. He admitted he had let June manipulate him for years and expressed genuine regret for how things had unfolded. He asked if we could meet in person. We met at a small coffee shop on a snowy afternoon. When I saw him, he looked exhausted, as though the weight of the past months had aged him. He apologized, his voice trembling as he admitted he had let June turn him against me. He expressed deep regret for the damage it had caused. I listened, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive him, but another part was wary. I told him that words weren't enough. Things had to change if we were going to move forward. He nodded, explaining that he had already started seeing a therapist to work through everything. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it felt like the first real step toward healing. Not long after, I heard through Eric that Dad had officially announced his separation from June. Their fights had reached a breaking point, and he couldn't take it anymore. She moved out of town, cutting ties with most of the family. It was strange to think about her being gone. For so long, she had been at the center of the chaos, and now she was just gone. Grace reached out again, this time with a genuine apology. She admitted she had been wrong to expect me to apologize and thanked me for standing firm. Slowly, we began rebuilding our relationship. By Christmas, I had chosen to spend the holiday with friends and a few supportive relatives. It was peaceful, drama-free, and exactly what I needed after everything that had happened. Just before the holiday, Dad sent me a letter. In it, he thanked me for giving him the chance to make things right and promised to continue working on himself. He was determined to rebuild our relationship on a healthier foundation. Looking back, it's been a long, exhausting journey. But if I've learned anything, it's the importance of standing firm in your boundaries. Sometimes, moving forward requires letting go of what's holding you back, even if that means losing people you once thought would always be in your life. For now, I'm cautiously optimistic about the future. Dad seems committed to change, Grace and I are on better terms, and June's influence over the family is finally gone. As the year comes to a close, I find myself hoping for a quieter, less eventful chapter ahead.